Chapter 17 The Farewell Tour. In Australia, it truly was a farewell tour. Jim Barnett had the territory for 8 years, and for his farewell tour he brought in the guys who he felt had the biggest impact over that time: Curtis Iaukea, Lewin, Milano, and Spiros Arion as the main babyfaces, and Bulldog Brower, Barnett, and myself as the lead heels. Unfortunately, the penthouse apartment my wife and I had previously stayed in wasn't available, but Curtis had a place at the Casa del Sol, and he told me that there was an apartment available there if I wanted it. It was a beautiful apartment on the 7th floor with a real nice balcony, where I could see the harbor bridge and the opera house. But remember how Curtis didn't have a balcony during my previous stay in Australia, and he had to use mine. Well, karma works in mysterious ways. At the Casa del Sol, Curtis was on the floor above me, and his patio looked down on mine. He loved walking out on his patio every morning, proudly declaring how clean and pure the air was up on the 8th floor. He would then loudly be in awe of his view and how far he could see, marveling, "I can actually see Kathmandu." Then, he would peek over his balcony, and I would be down on my patio laughing, of course. Invariably, he would ask me how the peasants were doing today. He loved doing that, and he had a great sense of humor. Jim Barnett let the news out to the media that he had sold the territory, and that this would be the last tour of Jim Barnett's stars in Australia. That was a brilliant marketing move on his part, and he told us, "Let's burn this place down and get all the money we can." We had cage matches, death matches, and first blood matches. We did everything we could think of. Did we hot-shot the territory? You better believe it. One night, Jim even had me hanging over the ring in a straitjacket off a hook. He wanted to get as much as he could before he was gone, and we lit that place up. During the tour, Bulldog Brower got a call from his wife back in Toronto. She told him she found someone else and was leaving him. She actually ran off with the guy who built their house, so while Bulldog was in Australia paying for it, she fell in love with the guy who built it. I was trying to calm him down, but he was a wild man. Thankfully, Curtis Iaukea came over, cut a big piece of hash the size of a Hershey's chocolate, and we had the Bulldog eat it. In about 2 hours, he was really mellow and happy. Since the Bulldog had to leave the tour and take care of his personal problems, Jim asked Carl Steiger to accompany him from Sydney to Toronto, because he didn't want Bulldog traveling alone. Before we put the Bulldog on the plane, I gave Carl a piece of hash the size of my thumb, and instructed him, about 6 hours outside of Toronto, slip this to him. In November, the Tennessee crew started coming in. If you recall, Jim Barnett, Jim Crockett, and Fritz von Erich were all very concerned that we wouldn't put the Tennessee talent over. That's because Tennessee was a bad word in wrestling due to the subpar talent and tasteless angles that territory was known for. It got to a point where anything with the word Tennessee in it had a very bad connotation, and if wrestlers didn't like an idea or a worker, it would be dismissed it with, "That's too much like Tennessee." Throughout different territories in the States, it really wasn't uncommon to hear things like, "That's a Tennessee finish," "He's a Tennessee worker," or "What a Tennessee idea." As soon as the Tennessee workers started integrating themselves on our cards, it was obvious that this wasn't going to work, because the caliber of talent simply wasn't there, and they just couldn't cut it. Because of the awful reputation Tennessee had, Roy Welch could never get good talent, and mainstream guys never wanted to work there. Therefore, the wrestlers that Welch and Buddy Fuller brought to Australia were second-tier talent at best. There were only 2 guys that they brought in that had any hope at all of following in our footsteps. One was Ron Fuller, who was Buddy's son and Roy's grandson. He was a very good in-ring performer. The other guy was Don Carson, who was a pretty decent worker. Still, they couldn't compare with Jim's crew. For 10 years he brought the cream of the crop, the best of the best, and the most elite talent from around the world to Australia. I knew from the get-go that Welch and Fuller would fail in Australia, because not only could they not afford the talent Jim could, but they were used to promoting in Tennessee. Australia was a sophisticated country with people from all over the world. It was very metropolitan and ethnically diverse, and it was clear from day one that they didn't understand that or take that into consideration. That only exacerbated any hard feelings and resistance from the guys on Jim's crew when it came to helping out Welch and Fuller. Curtis said, straight off the top, "I'm not putting any hillbillies over." Spiros said the same thing. Bulldog Brower had returned from Toronto, and between all the Dianabol, alcohol, and the loss of his wife, he was psychotic and in no mood to put over a hillbilly. Mark was walking around saying, "This hillbilly thing will last maybe 15 minutes, and then we'll all be back together." At the same time, I had given Jim Barnett, Jim Crockett, Fritz von Erich, and Buddy Fuller my word that I would do everything I could to get the Tennessee talent over, and I kept it, because my word meant something. Perhaps more importantly though, I was cooperative because of Jim Barnett's kindness to me over the years, and I knew this deal was important to him. Besides, why vent my frustration and sadness over losing Australia on the new guys coming in? It wasn't their fault that Jim sold the promotion. Since no one else would cooperate with the Tennessee talent, Brute Bernard and I ended up being the only two guys who went out and did jobs every single night. Brute and I even put over Jimmy Golden and Mike McCord in the finals of a very high-profile tag team tournament to crown the first Australasian tag team champions. And even though I had quite a big reputation in Australia and was still a member of Jim's elite $1,000 club, I'm the type of guy that if I gave you my word, I would do everything in my power to live up to what I promised, no matter the consequences. I had to endure quite a bit of razzing from the boys in the back for what I was doing, including Mark and Curtis, who were like brothers to me. Curtis thought I was a fool for helping out, and Mark would constantly say, "Wait until word gets back to the States that you're doing jobs for hillbillies." Brute and I really went out on a limb for them, and did everything we could possibly do to help the Tennessee talent get established in Australia. Jim Crockett told me he appreciated it and would always keep the door open for me in the Carolinas. Jim Barnett really appreciated all the jobs I did, as well. However, what I did night after night meant nothing to those hillbillies Roy Welch and Buddy Fuller. They showed me no gratitude at all that I was a stand-up guy for them, and I really resented that. During that particular tour, we were doing lots of acid, because Curtis had just come back from Maui with some really good stuff. We would board the plane after our matches and stick our tongues out if we wanted a hit. The good king would then walk around hitting all of our tongues with the acid. If anybody didn't want it, they simply didn't stick out their tongue. Naturally, my tongue was always out. One day, we all got on the plane in Brisbane, and, among others, Jimmy Golden's tongue was out. Jimmy was Roy Welch's grandson and Buddy Fuller's nephew, and he didn't handle the acid particularly well. He totally freaked out, stayed in a park in Sydney for 2 days, then packed his bags and went home to Tennessee. After the final show of the tour, Jim Barnett had a big party for his entire crew in Sydney. Everyone was there: talent, cameramen, technical people, sound men, announcers, and the rugby and soccer players who had been our security for all those years. We had one big party, and then went our separate ways. By the way, as I expected, Roy Welch and Buddy Fuller failed in Australia, and had to sell that territory within a matter of months.